Welcome everybody to another Game Dev Roundtable here on Game Wisdom, where we some of the art and science of games. We have another very interesting chat lineup for our month's topic. We're going to be discussing metagame design, all the confusing terminology that goes with it, and what does it mean as a developer to either build or manage your game around it. But before we get to that, as always, we're going to give our roundtable a chance to introduce themselves. So I'll start with myself, and then we'll go kind of clockwise around. I am again Josh Beiser from Game Wisdom. I talk way too much about game dev and game design. I have played just about all indie games ever released, and I am a multi-book or multi-published author with wow, mouth is dying there. Multi-published author with multiple books on design, including the Game Design Deep Dive series and 20 Essential Games to Study. But I'll throw it over to Rob.
Hello, my name is Rob Leach. I've been in games in some capacity or other as a producer, tester, and designer for a little over 20 years now. Just hit that 20-year mark. In a wide variety of different game companies and game types and genres. Most recently, I've been working for 2K on the NBA 2K series. But that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'll pass the potato on though.
All right, to Seth.
Hey, I'm Seth Goldberg, also known as the Strategy Informer. I've been around the gaming industry for longer than I can even count, and also the IT industry. I've been in pretty much every role in game design except art, 3D, that type of thing. Ran my own studio. My claim to fame is working on Ultima Online and some of the original MMOs like Asheron's Call, Lord of the Rings Online, etc., so forth.
All right, and to Ramin.
My name is Ramin Shokrizad. My handle is Sarsrock. I've been writing about game economics since the year 2000, and since about 2005, I attempted to create a field called that. I guess I would be credited with having created the metagame design for some games like World of Tanks Blitz, World of Warships, and now I'm a co-founder of a AAA company which is very much focused more on meta gameplay. We consider ourselves a transmedia company, and the name of that company is called Aravant.
All right. So this is definitely a very interesting topic, and I think when I pitched it, I was thinking more about meta in terms of like persistent elements. But meta as a term, or meta game design as a term, can definitely hit different things. And we're having a huge discussion, or a little bit of a discussion, on our little Discord thread about trying to figure out what exactly is metagame. So I think the first question then for the roundtable then is, when we talk about the metagame or metagame design, what does that mean? So, anyone want to start first? Feel free.
Yeah, I might as well because, I'll cover the ground that we covered in the Discord.
Mhm.
So, metagame originally came about in about the late 40s and became a scientific application for psychological studies. They were trying to determine what were the best results of various things. Over the years, that got brought into game theory and things like the Nash equilibrium. My mouth is not working either. And finding out, the best solutions to things like the prisoner's dilemma. What is the best option to take? And Richard Garfield then started talking about metagame design with obviously Magic in 95 or 96. And in 2000, he gave a conversational, not a conversation, a thing at the game design conference, a panel about metagame. So, it comes down to the game within the game. And it's really easy to see that in things like Magic the Gathering, Hearthstone, where the players find out what the best cards to play and the decks to play to get over a 50% win rate over time. So, you're shooting for 56, 57% win rates, if not higher. That's kind of the classical definition of metagame. Let's throw it over to Ramin, who has another definition.
Okay, I guess that makes it my turn.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would consider those early uses of the term to be in the realm of game theory, which is actually a mathematical process, which is not really about games, even though some of us make heavy use of game theory in the design of games. I I attempted to start using the term as it's now related to used in gaming about 10 years ago because I had to make a distinction between gameplay and metagame to explain how purchasing an advantage in a free-to-play game or any game really where you can purchase an advantage is functionally is okay to players in the metagame, but not okay in the gameplay. So I at the time I defined metagame as the gameplay that occurs between gameplay sessions, if that makes sense. And typically, when especially in games as a service, a gameplay session would be you competing directly in real time against other players. So the metagame would be stuff that you would be doing on your own between gameplay sessions, perhaps to prepare for your next gameplay session. Mm-hmm. And I make use of game economics and neuroscience and a bunch of psychology in order to figure out how to do that. In Magic the Gathering, I guess to me, if there was a metagame that was designed for that game, it was really just the gambling mechanics that were built into the cards to encourage players to organically trade between each other, but there wasn't really a marketplace created like we would have today to promote that sort of trade.
The gameplay between sessions would be the creation of the decks and the testing the decks. You wouldn't consider that a metagame?
I just said that if there is a metagame design, that would be the part that's the metagame for Magic Gathering. But there wasn't a marketplace created or anything like that. It's just basically the gambling mechanics that were created to generate the cards, the packs, so that players could engage in trading on their own organically without any design for that from the developer.
All right. And to you, Rob?
I was just gonna say, I mean, it's kind of on both sides. It's the way I look at it is kind of a fluid process that players take on to do kind of a min-maxing research, then share that knowledge, and then eventually it becomes someone else finds a better or quote better combination. Like to bring up like Dota or anything like that, people find like whatever the optimal build is. And everyone goes towards that until someone finds the other optimal build. And then there's this dance between the developer and the player. Does the developer acknowledge, react, suppress what that metagame turns out to be in favor of their own design feelings and strategies? Or do they kind of allow the players to push that and deal with it themselves? But there's always this kind of two-part back and forth, because once the metagame kind of identifies and locks onto something that kind of breaks things, so the knowledge of that metagame like takes over people who might not be interested, then you've got to have that back and forth. But that's kind of the way I see it, is the players kind of define it, the developer kind of rolls with it and reacts to it. But that's how I've seen it for a while.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm definitely, leaning towards what Ramin was saying about kind of like the game outside of the game. And it is something that when I was looking through or doing a lot of the games I was playing for my mobile book, I was watching, like, there's all kinds of fan theories and gameplay breakdowns and who's the best character? Who's the best card here? What's the best thing to use? What's your favorite PvP team? And so on. And I think to Rob's point, I think what's very fascinating is when we get that clash between the developer side and the player side. Because as we've seen, like, the metagame is oftentimes established, like, even though the game is obviously created by a designer, the meta is oftentimes defined by the consumer.
The player.
If, pick, again, like with Hearthstone, the era of Miracle Rogue, when I was playing Marvel Strike Force, like, heavy PvP, defender-based builds, stuff like that. And the problem, though, is what happens when that meta becomes solidified? What happens when everyone agrees, yes, this one card or this one group, that's the best? How do you respond to that as a developer? Because we've seen this kind of go both ways. We've seen some developers who they will break their meta just like, dropping a bomb onto their game every 5 to 6 months. Dead by Daylight, at the time of us doing this stream, they just had their 6.5-year anniversary. And a big point about that anniversary was just saying, hey, we're just going to alter every meta perk in the entire game over the last 6.5 years. Go back and relearn it. And then there are some developers, I think this is where we get to kind of the more, I'm not sure we consider the shadier side, but more the economic side, that if you just release a 6-star character or a new card in a competitive game, and everyone considers that to be the meta, maybe we won't change that and let people, just keep buying that or keep, rolling on the banner to hope that they get that. And then they can then, show off and lure it over all their friends and rivals.
I'd like to counter that with the meta really only applies to those playing at high levels. Now, it exists at lower levels, of course, but the people at the high levels are the only ones that have to follow the meta. And when the meta gets stale, people stop playing. So, at least in card games, I don't know about gachas and free to play mobiles, but in the card game arena, you have to keep a fresh meta, or people burn out. Or, in Magic, Teferi was one of the genre-defining or game-defining cards for a while, a couple of years back, and they had to nerf it. And really, to change the meta, you either downgrade a character, you nerf it, or you upgrade other things, you buff them. And that is something where the company is reacting to what the players have found, because I don't think in the time frames that we're talking about, the game developers can test for these metas and design around it. It doesn't make sense to me. Now, Ramin, you mentioned that in World of Tanks, that was predefined.
I can't take credit for the designer World of Tanks. I wrote about the designer World of Tanks and then was added to the team after post-launch, where I did some optimizations, but did not design World of Tanks. I designed World of Tanks Blitz.
Oh, okay. I don't know what Blitz is.
The mobile version.
So they analyzed all the tanks against all the other tanks, and when they released an update, they knew what was going to become the dominant tank and the dominant strategies?
Well, if we were attempting to create an imbalance, then yes, but I that wasn't the objective while I was at the company.
Okay.
I've already had a podcast with Josh about how that may have become the objective later on after I left.
We should post that in the comments. Not in the comments, in the about, or the thing below.
I mean, because in Pay to Win, which we were very clear that the part of the company culture and wargaming while I was there, this was straight from the founders. Pay to Win was not an option. It was made very clear to me during my hiring interview that they were vehemently against this, which was fantastic for me because I was also, which is part of why I was hired. But that they did a 180 later on after I left, and they started bringing in people from Machine Zone who are very much into pay to win. And so then you started seeing premium tanks entering the ecosystem that were clearly superior to other tanks, especially regarding to like their hitboxes and stuff. If you understand what I'm meaning there.
Yeah.
And so and that's just like for instance, that makes me think of Blizzard and Activision, where they one of the critical things about making sure gameplay is fair is the matchmaker, and they were so proud of their efforts to make mismatch makers that they even went to the extreme length of patenting it sometime after I detected they were working on this. Which blows my mind still to this day that they would not only publicly acknowledge that they make mismatch makers, but that they would also patent them so that everyone would know.
Yeah, and I wrote about that in the last book. I think I posted the link to the patent on our little Discord chat as well. I guess technically Microsoft now owns that, if since Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard. But yeah, definitely just a very wild situation there. And I think to Ramin's point, I think that's another very important aspect when we talk about meta design, is that there's a difference between designing, let's say, 6 really good options, or how many you want in any kind of game, versus actually explicitly tweaking something to kind of force that meta. And to give you guys an example of this, I always go back to Marvel Strike Force in this regard. That they introduced a character that, at the time, they were the only one who could revive somebody on your team if one of your teammates died. So if you build a very powerful team that's, all synergy based, and let's say your opponent manages to kill one of them, well, I can just bring them right back, all those synergy bonuses come back. There was no defense against it, there was no way to get around that. Until they added in another legendary character, it was like a year and a half afterwards. And that was a character that only someone who had, a lot of paid currency or, super high level could actually manage. So for a good year or so of the game being out, this one character dominated the meta. And, people complained about it, and there was never a free alternative put into it. And I think this kind of goes similar to Ramin's example of, tweaking, the hitbox on a tank to make sure that, hey, this tank, yes, it's like all your other tanks, but this one has a little smaller window where you can actually do, max damage to it. And I think one thing that we've been kind of talking about is that the player base is shockingly good at identifying meta components in a game. They will break your game every which way to find that advantage, even if your game is not competitively driven. We've seen, how many videos on single-player games. I remember seeing dozens of videos on Neo and Dark Souls, or any Souls-like. This is how you build a perfect spec weapon you can beat the entire game on the Soul level 1. And when they find something that is unethical, when they spot those issues, they will raise every red flag. They will, sound the air horn siren to people to let them know about it.
Well, that's
I would posit that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to bring in the YouTube thing. I mean, that kind of drove it even faster because everyone's wanting to get that special knowledge out there to get those clicks and views. So it just drives itself. It's the meta thing. It's crazy. Go ahead.
I would say that we've been writing articles of, people are writing up stuff about gameplay for a long time. But I would suggest that our public consciousness of metagame design has only been fairly recently. And especially with influencers on YouTube, I've really been impressed by how much their understanding of what goes on behind the game has increased just in the last, say, 5 years. And that's really trickled down to the players as they watch these YouTube videos, and they become conscious of what the other game is that the developers are playing with them.
Yep, and that I think is that when we talk about specifically from like a live service or free to play game, that's always I think in the back of the minds of people who play it. Am I actually winning, because of my skill, or am I winning because, the game just decided to lower the stats of this enemy, or, I somehow got that very lucky character. As I just did a video about the game Marvel Contest of Champions, I talked about how in that game's meta, there is a huge difference in terms of account quality, getting a, bad, good, fantastic character. And it's always that issue of, as a developer, how do you balance your game around this? And I guess it would be a good question for the group then. When we talk about things from a game design standpoint, you obviously as a developer know, okay, we're going to introduce these enemies, or we're going to have a challenge, let's say, all about bleed damage or ice damage or whatever. How do you tweak a game, or how do you balance your game to make sure that you're not creating that, I guess, untrusting or that very manipulative meta of, say, oh, we're only going to design this so that only people who have, these 3 specific 6-star characters, they're going to be the only ones who can do this. Everyone else, good luck, fight out in the weeds.
I think when you create an environment like that, people are going to try to break it. They probably will, because they can, you get 10,000 players really hammering at something, or 100,000 players, as some of these games can pull. They're gonna find the exploit in it. Before, computer games, metagaming used to be min-maxing in, say, role-playing games, and that spread very slowly because we didn't have the internet, and kind of spread between groups, and nothing was done about it unless there was a big addition change, because you couldn't send downloads, you couldn't send updates to everybody, so you would have to wait for 4th edition or 5th edition. So now they can just patch the meta so that when it's broken and when someone finds it, they fix it. I'm not 100% sure how much testing is done ahead of time, because it gets exponentially harder the more characters there are, the more permutations there are, the more items there are. Unless they just, code hard stops. If you don't have X, Y, and Z, you're not getting through, like some visual novels do with stat checks.
I'm thinking about how back in 2000, when I wrote that first article about trading between players, it was happening organically. There wasn't any thought out on the part of developers about this, so they weren't designing for this, or this metagame that had started appearing, which was the player trades. And in fact, I believe it was in 2004 that Blizzard banned that type of organic trading in their end user license agreement, and the rest of the industry followed suit after that. Now there's attempts to, especially with Web3, to reverse that and encourage that sort of trading. So you're seeing an intense amount of activity around these sort of metagame elements that are related to player trades, and how to create that securely. But you could even argue that there's a metagame existing between the players and the developers, and that's what makes it interactive media, where the developer is trying to manipulate the player's behavior, while the influencers are trying to teach the players how to identify this manipulation and how to avoid it. And so there's this game of cat and mouse where the developers are trying to beat the players, which I've written. I consider that unethical, but it's pretty much a norm. I mean, especially when you look at something like Diablo Immortal, where I argue that increasingly metagame would become so important in games that it would actually be most of the design of a game. And in the case of Diablo Immortal, I would say they put a lot more work in to this cat and mouse game that they're trying to hide, even though compared to the amount of work they actually put into the gameplay of the game, which is which is why a lot of influencers don't even talk about the game anymore because they consider it so unethical.
Yeah, I feel like a good way to approach what you say in terms of the ethical dilemma you face in reacting to a meta going and trying to force one yourself might be to take this kind of like, I want to win, I want to beat the players want to beat me, into more of a friendly banter. Like, okay, well, you got us, you've shown us where the game is broken, we're going to try and change things a little bit, keep things interesting, as opposed to, well, we're going to make sure that these people pay to win, and then we can't nerf them because they paid us, and we can't get anyone else equal to them because these guys paid us. And then you have that problem just inherent in that transaction. But yeah, I feel like the goal should be to embrace the players, embrace the communities, and really bring them into the development process, which I feel like happens naturally in many circumstances. But yeah, you're right. It can turn bad fast.
Yep, and like with the Immortal Strike Force example, instead of nerfing the character or anything like that, all the developer did was make her drop rate super low. Like there were like never any banners for that character. You had to either had bought that character like week 1 of it being released, or you may get it, by pure happenstance, maybe like a year of lucky random drops. And again, like it's that issue of our paying players, we nerf this and they're going to revolt. The whales aren't going to want you to nerf their favorite character, but the character or the build or whatever just completely demolishes everything else in the game. And it's that very, this is where we get to like some more of the unethical designs of some of these games, when kind of the monetization of the game or getting money from the game is kind of put ahead of actually maintaining the stability and long-term play of it.
What about when we're not talking about games as a service or PvP style games, the metagame developing in, say, Slay the Spire, or even an RPG like Baldur's Gate? Obviously there are optimal character builds in various games. There are optimal ways to play various deck builders. The cards to always go for, the relics to always go for, the builds to take to get to the overpowered state or break it. The new Horde games, Vampire Survivors, I guess that's what they're being called now, is the Horde games. Obviously, there's
Horde roguelite or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great genre.
Yeah.
It's a great genre, but it plays on trying to break it, where the meta for that game is to break it. So how do you design, say, a Horde game with overpowered abilities, but yet still make it fun to the player? Or does it not matter? You're just going for those 10,000 dopamine hits.
Well, I mean, I would suggest that whatever people are doing to try to figure out how to win in the gameplay is you can describe that as meta, but I would say that that's actually not like metagame design. That's just players trying to figure out how to improve their gameplay, but that's not actually anything that's designed by the developer.
Right.
And I think this gets to a comment by Thousmoon from earlier about, could this explain a large disenfranchisement with the current era of games, that meta mindset has trickled down to casual players and made them perhaps less engaged in the world and more engaged in game design interactions? And I think to what Seth was just talking about, with regard to a game like Slay the Spire, or to any kind of like single player game where the kind of design is, I guess, solved, in the sense that, like, in a game like Slay the Spire, we're not going to be seeing 30 new cards come every cycle. We're not going to be seeing new characters come at a regular basis. it is a game that's more about, okay, how do I solve this equation of, getting enough damage to beat the boss? And when we see kind of like the meta or the analysis develop around that, this is something that I've said before, that I typically don't like min-maxing in games. I feel that kind of robs it of the interesting elements of playing it. I've said this like for a lot of like in our roguelike talks. I always like the island of misfit toys approach. How do I take this random card and this random artifact and this, and this, and somehow I break the game that way? That I rather kind of letting it occur organically versus say like when we talk about, the traditional idea of a metagame, that I'm already building my strategy before I play the game, and thereby, it kind of like robs me of the actual play of the game, at the actual time. That makes sense.
Well, I'm resisting this creep into what the players think about, how to win as metagame design, but it is, I guess you consider it metagame. And I gave a talk in 2016 about in St. Petersburg about the current state of mobile game development, and during that talk, I gave this very long explanation where I explained that Tinder was the top mobile game at the time, and I could perhaps argue that it's still the top mobile game out there. And if you want to talk about min-maxing, wow, Tinder has a lot of min-maxing, and you've got just entire channels and tons of content on, for instance, YouTube, where people are explaining to you how to min-max that game so that you can beat your opponent. Then they almost use those exact type of words too, which is just kind of mind-blowing, even though they probably wouldn't really think of it as a game. And my audience at the time was like, wait, I thought we were talking about games. Why are you talking about Tinder? But Tinder to me, is absolutely a game with a lot of really high-value user-generated content.
If you go for that that theory, then life itself is you can metagame life.
I figured you'd be going in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking, how would I counter that? It's difficult because it gets murkier and murkier the further you go.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a little bit. That's getting a little bit too high level meta for me. But I get the point. I mean, I feel like YouTube is that same way. Like we're all like on YouTube, we're all trying to get people to come find us and leveraging the algorithm as best we can. For those of us who are even aware of it, I have no clues, and I don't know anyone who really has a good grasp. But yeah, life as metagame, I feel like is a real easy way to just go insane trying to grapple with it. It's there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What route do I go down?
And
Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. Finish your thought.
There's increasingly more and more strings above us as we go through life, especially as AI is being developed, that we're not even supposed to be conscious of, which is, you could get into conspiracy theories, but, there's so much science related to it that it's not a conspiracy. It's just really high technology, and most people aren't aware of it and probably would rather not be aware of it.
I guess
an example of that.
The Matrix was a good example of that.
Okay.
And I feel like we're rocketing towards the Matrix. And especially if you took a look at what type of AI is in the pipeline.
I guess like to continue that train of thought for a second, when we talk about the use of like gamification in either like everyday lives or incentivizing people to do something, would this be considered like an example of that kind of like metagame design?
Well, I can use an example from the game I'm designing right now, which is it's Star Garden, and we have this pre-game, which we call a mini game, that occurs before it, and we're about to do an arama mint. Aramas are cute little creatures from our world, and to me, just putting out a PFP which is what most people think of when they think of an NFT, is not really doesn't really have a metagame attached to it. So to me, I would think that the lifespan of that content would be as short as you would expect a game that doesn't have a metagame. Metagame is great for extending content by giving purpose to the content or long-term goals in playing with that content. So I've just finished doing this metagame design for how to gamify our oramas, which are actually customizable by our players, as opposed to what you would normally think of as a PFP, where you just have it and it's always that one thing. And really, only when you have the NFT, it's really just a link to that thing that isn't even in your hands. But since we can modify these NFTs, we can have the players can modify them themselves and change the orama by changing its appearance as they wish, by creating certain sets of clothing, like you would see, for instance, in the original Diablo had equipment sets. Then you can activate special abilities, which again, that goes all the way back to Diablo or earlier. That to me makes it more interesting, because now players will be trying to find certain pieces for a reason. They'll be trading with other people to try to complete their sets, and I think that'll make the whole Rama, metagame will drive much more engagement with our Ramas than if we just released a bunch of PFPs.
See what's going on in chat. Yeah, and I think again, the player interaction is such a key factor in this. And to bring this back to the question about metagame design, I guess I'm gonna throw this over to you, Ramin, for a second. With your game and with the games you've worked on, how do you, I guess, balance these two different factors of, I want to design content that is obviously popular and profitable, but at the same time, I don't want to make something that is just literally, somebody buys this, it's an I win button. Or it's, this will guarantee you top 10 spot on the server in terms of that content.
Well, I mean, you must know I'm burning to answer a question like that. I just didn't really want to be the one to divert in that direction. But I mean, for me, as a developer, I'd like to think that I'm ahead of the competition in the area of metagame design, which, if I wasn't an ethical person, would be really bad news for my players. Because right now, a lot of the metagame design you see that's out there is ways the developers are trying to trick or manipulate players for the developers' best interest. I think the best use of this technology, like pretty much anything technology, is to serve the consumer, not the maker of the technology. So in everything I build, I don't put it in there unless it's something that improves the gameplay for the player and meets their needs, which means they're basically, I'm introducing a new business model called Free-to-Play Plus, which takes all the advantages of free-to-play. I'm about to publish an article on this, but removes the microtransactions, which is what really wrecks the free-to-play model. I mean, so going all the way back to MapleStory in 2001, where the microtransactions were used to generate revenue in a free-to-play environment, and were also used to break that game to make it pay to win. So you remove those microtransactions and you remove the pay to win, then you get I think the most utopian business model that I can come up with in the current environment. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. And I guess with some of the examples, as we talked about, I think one of our first podcasts together was trying to define what is considered pay to win. So I guess to kind of add on to that point then. So for one of the games that you're designing right now, that obviously anything NDA breaking you'll need to say, but what would you consider to be, I guess, an ethical example of a microtransaction in this regard versus one that would be considered unethical?
I mean, this goes back 10 years to where I was trying to actually define this stuff, because I was trying to figure out, well, what is ethical, what isn't ethical, where is it okay to buy advantage, and where isn't it okay to buy advantage. And for me, it's okay for a player to buy advantage in the metagame, as long as that doesn't translate to advantage in gameplay. Now, you could say, well, if a player is getting advantage in the metagame, then maybe that means they're progressing through the game faster than someone else. Now, in order to prevent that from becoming pay to win, like it would maybe in an open world game, where people could just compete freely without any sort of matchmaker, the key thing is to have a matchmaker that protects players from abuse from players who are at a different advancement level in the game. Just like you would have an ELO system in chess to make sure that players are properly matched, which is again why I still to this day are really shocked about what Blizzard did with their mismatch maker patent. But I had to go a step further. For instance, in World of Tanks or World of Warships, those games use a matchmaker, to what I would call a symmetrical matchmaker, to protect players, to make sure matches are fair enough. If you ignore the hitbox locations on the premium tanks and ships and stuff. To take that a step further, to allow players to play against their neighbors, which is what we're going to be doing with geolocation. We're trying to create a very social environment that, unlike anything that, except for maybe Pokemon Go, which just happened accidentally. We're trying to create a very social environment where people can play against their neighbors and be on different teams. But a normal asymmetrical matchmaker would die under those conditions. It would just be too hard to match those two teams if they weren't equal enough. So I created an asymmetrical matchmaker, which I started developing while I was at Wargaming, which allows two teams who aren't properly power matched to still play by removing the win-loss binary and replacing it with something else. That's as much as I can say without leaking too much alpha there. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think it's gonna be one I definitely want to see it like in action, like when the time comes, just to see like how the community plays around with it. Let's see. This point from 1,000 I think is a really good question for the group. They were talking about designers who are trying so hard to design a good meta might be after the wrong thing, like the devs who are trying so hard to design an esports friendly game. So I guess for the table here, when it comes to the actual, like, when as a designer, should a designer be actively thinking about the meta as you're creating new content? And I think it was Pony's example about like with League of Legends, that like they introduce a new champion, and then the following champion could either be a direct counter to the previous one, or trying to force the meta into a new direction. This is again like going back to the Dead by Daylight example, that their whole point about just breaking their meta was just as a way of countering all the established meta strategies, all the established builds that have been built up over the last 6.5 years of that game. Like, is it better, I think, from, I guess, like the health of your game, to be just constantly, just like purposely fighting against the meta? Or is it better just to create, new content, and then maybe kind of let the chips fall where they may, and then kind of like take stock after that?
You see in these,
go ahead. Yeah.
What we see in these free-to-play games, with an esport, League of Legends, Dota, even Magic the Gathering, especially Hearthstone, is the new expansion, the new meta, is always more powerful than the stuff before. So you're getting tremendous amounts of power creep, because they want people to go off and buy the new champion, because they're going to be X much better than the other person. And then in the next expansion, they counter that by releasing someone more powerful. It's actually quite so they're not looking necessarily for a good meta, or they're balancing it against power creep. They're balancing it against getting people to spend money on the new character.
These are companies that aren't trying to balance their games at all. They're intentionally trying to unbalance their games to make money that way. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Rob.
Oh, I mean, it's not too far from your point. It's you don't have to. I think it's fair for a company to try and establish a meta in their original design. It's very difficult. I think it's fair though, and even in patches, trying to consider what the existing meta is and maybe change it. Now, for profit is certainly a driving force, right? But the staleness, I think we had alluded to it a while ago. I think Seth mentioned the staleness of any given meta, where it gets to a point where, well, everyone's playing the same build, everyone's playing the same deck strategy. That's when the developer should probably step in and say, okay, well, I kind of want to mix it up. I don't want my players to get bored. But that's where that back and forth happens. I feel you must let the players determine the way they want to go, and then react accordingly without, that's where those problems come in, like without being too heavy-handed about the new character they have coming out. Although I understand why they'd want to push it. It showcases the freshness of the product. Yeah, the money involved is also like I say, the driving factor too. But it is fair for that back and forth to happen. I think that's the most ideal situation, is that the developer sees all these players going a certain direction and says, hey, you know what? There's more to this game than just that character. Here's a nudge in a different direction. I think it can go in that kind of back and forth. I think it has to in a lot of cases. But that's how I look at it in terms of whether or not the developer can or should push a meta to begin with.
When developers introduce new content and charge for it, and they've previously put out content that either they charged for or players had to work really hard for, that previous content had some value, either the earned value or the paid value, and when the developer puts out new content that's superior, it destroys the value of previous content, which is, I think, very discouraging for players. Just like, when you buy a car, you expect the value to go down over time, but you don't necessarily expect somebody to just, outlaw roads and make your car useless after you bought it. Even this happens a lot, even as we go into Web3 too, where people are owning their own assets. It's especially important. So this is something I've had to really put some recent years thought into, is how do we introduce new content, but without reducing the value of any previous content, because if the whole point of having these tradable assets in games is for them to have some sort of value that could be enduring, you don't want the developer being your worst enemy by putting out stuff that's going to reduce the value of the things they previously told you would be valuable, even though that's seems like it's occurring in 99% of the space right now.
Yeah, with Magic, the rotations where cards go out of play, unless they're reprinted. So every couple of months, you're spending money on new boxes. You have to. That's why I quit Magic finally.
I mean, they were thinking about this stuff way ahead of us because they had to with their physical cards. It's interesting seeing, their solutions and our solutions. There's some overlap because we're trying to solve the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is definitely a thing to think about in terms of that, the force that you put into it. Yeah, you want to sell something new, but yeah, you're right. You don't want to take the hundreds, if sometimes thousands of hours someone's put into something and just say, hey, yeah, that's no longer valid. You can't do anything with that character anymore or that build. But I feel like that the discussion between the developer and the player should be as lighthearted as possible because you don't want to become the player's enemy. Certainly that happens, and one way it might say, well, the player will leave. A lot of times they don't. They put a lot of effort into sticking around here, and when you start forcing them to if it's an antagonistic relationship, it might exist on the line, and that you still might be getting money out of that person, but you want them to have fun. Like you put a lot of hours into something, you're kind of attached to it. You're in a rock and a hard place at that point.
Is grinding really fun? Like taking, the MMO? I think it takes a certain type of personality to like that. But if we look at raids, the designers of the good raids were trying to figure out how to just absolutely devastate the party and make them keep coming back and then equipping up until they could finally get there. A lot of that was through stat management, but there was also rotations for what to do and where to stand and what mob to hit first.
I feel like that's a puzzle element, introducing that additional challenge. So if the players do find a meta that works on one boss and then maybe works on a bunch of others, the developer can come up with that thing and says, okay, well, it's too easy now with this combination of characters. Let's make one that's kind of immune to that. So your characters still have meaning. They can be powerful in a lot of different ways, but maybe that one boss, they're going to have to think differently for. I like that. I think that's a really cool approach.
And I think to kind of build off what Seth was talking about a few minutes ago regarding power creep, that is, I think, another major issue when we talk about kind of the developer putting their finger on the scale of the meta. If I remember when I was trying to play Hearthstone, it's like, okay, the standard, 2-cost card is maybe like a 1-2 attack defense or a 2-2. But then, the new expansion introduces a 2-cost card that's like a 2-2 and it does extra damage or it heals your party. And it's that case, I think this goes to what Ramin was talking about, that you don't want to introduce something that invalidates something else that you've put out into your game. And that inherently becomes more difficult as your game goes, from month to month to year. And if you design your game purposely around that we all know that all year 1 content is going to become obsolete when year 2 comes out. I think that creates a very unethical situation, a very unethical atmosphere. And it's one of the reasons why I stopped playing a lot of those games, where it's just like, well, either I keep up, or the second I fall behind, I'm never going to catch up unless I spend tons and tons of money and maybe get that lucky new character. And it's that case of, I think for a lot of these longer running like mobile games, especially in the gacha market, that you can see the kind of like difference in the mindset of their designs. With a Contest of Champions, it's like, okay, here's a 5-star, magic champion. They just do magic damage. Okay. Here's a 5-star magic character, designed last year. They completely nullify all special effects. They gain free healing. They kill enemies like half the speed of anyone else. Why should I ever use that other 5-star character or that other mythic character? Well, the answer is no. There's characters in some of these games that they're inherently a bad choice. There's never a reason why you should ever take that character. But they're still in the game. They're still in the monetization pool. And I think, to me, that is definitely a major issue.
They're still in the pool for the suckers that bought them before, but the new players are probably becoming astute enough not to buy the old content.
Or you get unlucky roll like I do when it comes to some of these gachas, and you just get all the old meta characters, and you never get anything new.
Starting to think we should start a game dev roundtable for gachas.
I could certainly rant and rave about that one there.
The last time I was at the Blizzard headquarters for an interview, few years ago. They said they were looking for a game economist, and I got there and I started talking about economics, and they literally got mad at me and started insulting me because they didn't want to talk about game economics. They wanted to pump me for information on gotcha. And I wasn't being cooperative, so I didn't get the job. And and I was like, well, don't you guys want to talk about game economics? They got mad at me. The job was titled game economist, so I just assumed they wanted to talk about game economics.
The metagame of the interview, trying to figure out what they're really asking for.
In sports management games, fantasy management games, understanding the meta is almost critical to being able to go through. Obviously there are players that are better than others and lineups that are better than others. So you're gonna wanna hit those, even if you're a new player. There are tons of resources for finding out, stuff on there's a whole industry on fantasy football and stuff like that.
And like as we were saying earlier, like with the rise of YouTuber and Twitch streamers, there are entire channels and discussions dedicated to not just every single mobile, every single free-to-play game, but every single strategy. Like some of the more popular like mobile streamers and YouTubers, they'll have like 10, 15 different channels. This channel is dedicated to this live service game. This channel is dedicated to this one. And there is that whole, and I think to Rob's point earlier, like there is an economy around who can be the first one to break this game, who can be the first one to make that video saying, hey, I figure out how to do this challenge with this 5-star, even just like with all 3-star characters, it's completely free, and you do this, it will guarantee you top ranking on the server.
We were doing that with game previews and game articles in the early MMOs back 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I had this promise when I did a game preview for an MMO, because I only did MMOs, that I would not do a preview unless I had spent 200 hours in the game. And after 200 hours, I'd know a lot of tricks. And so I would publish a bunch of these tricks, and I think that made my articles popular. But it's really just the same thing you see now in YouTube. If an influencer is playing a game enough to become an expert at the game, then they'll be trying to teach their followers how to get that expertise, and that makes their information useful to the people watching those videos, and so they become more popular.
Yeah, that's
I think
tough.
it's not new, but
Yeah, it's the race to the information. And with YouTube now, you can find one trick and then make a video about that one trick, and then hope someone doesn't take it and leverage it for their more popular channel.
Oh yeah, there's
Go ahead.
There's like controversies around that with people saying, "Oh, you stole my strategy." No, I came up with it first. No, you ripped it off from me.
and there's a good example of this.
Go ahead, Seth.
In a lot of cases, the really popular streamers, the really big streamers that are streaming some of these gotcha games or mobile games as a service, they're being paid to do that, and they're given accounts with everything unlocked and that type of thing. So it's easier for them, but it generates money for the games, because people go, oh, okay, I can beat this, I can get past it. I can accelerate my growth curve.
This has become a real problem with Web3 and blockchain games, where you have influencers who are hyping the hell out of a new blockchain game, and giving basically explicit financial advice, saying you should buy these. They're going to go up in value. You're get it while it's hot. And they it's like being in a multi-level marketing, seminar where
Yeah.
they're trying to get you to buy the stuff because then you can sell it to other people for more than you bought it for, and it's like easy money, and they're just paid to do that, and the people, believe this and believe that it's like an impartial influencer. They don't realize that, they don't. Every time I see this, I look to see the disclaimer to say how much they've been paid, and they don't share that. So I don't even know if that's legal. It probably isn't, but there's so much Wild West stuff going on right now in Web3.
A lot of it is pump and dumps with those influencers. And I think that's, something that's hurting the development of Web3 dramatically.
I mean, the projects are often pump and dumps, but my concern is specifically the unethical behavior of the influencer that's a paid, um, advertiser, but isn't disclosing that. Which I know
Right.
I that became a big deal. I remember that it was a big deal in regular MMOs back in, I don't know, it was that 2004, 2005 with Shadowbane, where Ubisoft was handling their publishing and their marketing, and Ubisoft hired a person at one of our competing websites back when I was a journalist that had exclusive access to the alpha and was putting out articles hyping Shadowbane, and
Right.
we found out that person was actually an employee of Ubisoft and was being paid under the table to do that. And we published that, and that created a huge civil war in the game journalism environment because it was perceived as two competing news sources going after each other. But I think later on that ended up becoming illegal in the United States. It's still going on in other parts of the world.
You have to declare that you're getting paid, yeah. But no one does.
But that's the thing. It's even if it's illegal, it's not. It's still happening, and
Enforced.
it's not. Doesn't seem to be. They don't seem to be enforcing it. I report it to YouTube when I see it, but I don't know if they do anything about it either.
They don't. A lot of the gambling people that stream or do video on slot machines, they're getting paid. They're getting, in some cases, millions of dollars to play, and they're not playing with their own money.
All those. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say all the CS:GO scandals with the skin
with the crates, yeah. And gaming is not the only industry this is happening in. In almost every marketing situation, people not declaring affiliate links, people trying to hide affiliate links. It's illegal. People not declaring that they are paid to review a product. That's illegal. Hyping a product for money in any financial gain by the people that designed it is illegal, and you see it in productivity. You see it in pretty much every get rich quick scheme. Who's that guy on YouTube that has the 15 cards and he reads all the books? He's hyping a product, and he's not declaring that he's hyping the product. He's trying to hide it as this is what made me a millionaire. Yeah, no.
Yeah, it goes way back into the days of payola. For
exactly
DJs and yeah.
Well,
I don't know. Is payola illegal?
I don't know, but it should be. Yeah, I interrupted Ramin. I'm sorry.
No worries. What about as we move towards more and more complex forms of AI? You already have systems where a human can just create 1,000 influencers with a few hits of a keyboard to counter any bad publicity that they may be getting. And humans often relying on inductive reasoning, where if they see something, if they see when they're driving, if they see the light is green and they think, oh, it's safe because the last 1,000 times I've driven to the green light, nothing bad happened. They just assume that at some point through inductive reasoning, this is the repeating behavior, that it must be okay to cross the light if it's green without looking. well, the same thing here. You're tricking the brain's reliance on inductive reasoning by spamming them with 1,000 influencers that they assume are real people, but they're just AI. And the few people who are real get drowned out, and you ignore those because you go with whatever has the most positive sources, just like on a review. That's how reviews work. You look to see how many 5-star reviews and how many 1-star reviews. But if all the 5 stars are bots, it undermines your ability to use inductive reasoning to make a decision. And it's basically, I mean, it's a way of controlling behavior.
And I mean, when we look at kind of like the early 2010s of the mobile industry, how many just shady and unethical games were released, and they drown out all the games that are trying to be legitimate. And it is that I mean, that, well has been poisoned so effectively that there are so many people these days who they will not look at anything mobile, anything that is free to play, because how many stories have they heard of someone being burned by a game, or, someone spending tens of thousands of dollars by accident? And consumer trust is such a major point. I think that could be a little bit too much of a tangent, but it is such a factor, as we talk about, when it comes to consumers understanding the meta or the game outside the game. That if they hear that, yeah, this game is good, but if you don't get this, this, and this, or if you don't spend $5,000 to get these great characters, you might as well just not play. They're not going to play that. They're not even going to even think about installing that.
I think, that goes even back to Facebook gaming. They were trying to do every exploit possible, taking clues from the casino industry. And by exploit, I mean exploiting the player. The games weren't fair at all. I don't really think most of the gachas I play are fair. I think they're all rigged. And because there's no regulating body to this, why wouldn't you rig it? I mean, what's to stop you from doing it? No regulating body. Although the EU is starting to clamp down on what they're calling dark patterns, which are things like, making it difficult to cancel a subscription, or, the continue button is where the cancel button, or the continue button is where the OK button should be. Just little tricks to get you to keep involved. I tried to cancel an Amazon Prime subscription, and I know this is off topic, but
You go away.
I'm going anyway. And it was really difficult. It was much more difficult than doing it in the United States. Go figure.
Well, I when I went to Panama to address the International Consumer Protection Enforcement Network, that's a lot. That's a mouthful. That when they were trying to generate the first generation of regulations protecting children in online games, I risked/torpedoed my career to give a presentation to explain to them all the tricks that the developers were currently using, and I put up I did a bunch of slides of showing a Disney game with the vice president of Disney sitting right next to me, who later had to flee the conference after my presentation. But where the game was Marvel Superhero Squad Online, that was supposedly a game aimed at 6 to 8-year-olds, and I showed like 20 screenshots of the first 20 screens that you would see as a child in the tutorial, and every single one had a green button and a red button. And in each case, the green button would cause mom's credit card to be charged, and the red button would not cause mom's credit card to be charged. And at that age, children know that, again, inductive reasoning, green is good, is safe, red is bad. So even if they can't even understand the button or what the button means, they just keep hitting the green button, and they would just charge up mom's credit card. And I intentionally showed every screen so that I could show that it was done on every screen, so that it wouldn't be. They couldn't argue. The vice president next to me couldn't argue. Oh, that was just coincidence. Because mathematically, you do the math. It's just millions to one chance that could be a coincidence.
And I still remember when someone was arguing about like esports should, or I'm sorry, mobile games like Clash of Clans should be treated as a regular esports. Look at this tournament. No one spent 1 cent to get in there. And I asked the person, so how much do they spend lifetime to get to that point? No response. They did not say anything about that.
I also showed them the adult version because Gazillion made that game and also made like Marvel Online or something like that, and which was actually a very popular game. And the adult version had none of these gimmicks because adults would see through them. So the Disney VP stood up and said, well, we go out of great lengths to protect children more than we would adults because they're, and I completely proved that she was lying, and that's why she had to flee the conference right in front of all these regulators. It was probably quite embarrassing for them and probably quite disastrous for my career. But of course, I do it again. I'm dumb like that.
Some have stronger ethics on the good side. I'm proud of you.
I'm playing a long game here.
The long game club right here. As a bit of a time check, we are about an hour and 10 of the recording. It is about 6:30 ET my time. Ramin, you said you have to get going by 7, right? Like in about 30 minutes or less?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes,
I would say maybe another 10 to 15 minutes, I think, at most. For chat, if you do have any questions about metagame design, metagame play, anything like that, this will be officially last call for it. So, I guess the point that I was thinking about was more about designing a game to be fair. With regards, as we were saying earlier, that to avoid power creep in terms of designing a game or designing more interesting options as opposed to just flat out power. But I'm going to throw it over to you guys. Does anyone have any other topics regarding meta gameplay or meta game design they would like to bring up to the group?
We've hit a lot of stuff I was looking to cover. So,
Editor talks about what is the game that has the best meta design.
I'll recuse myself from answering that question.
That's tough, right?
What is considered a good meta design?
I know
incidental or purposeful.
I think it was Thousand who brought up like the original StarCraft and how there's still a meta every few months around that, even though there hasn't been any new updates. And I think with something like that kind of design, I think that's more like the consumer is kind of dictating that more than the developer at that point. If everyone decides one day, hey, I want to play, Dark Templar as my Protoss, then that's going to dictate, well, what's the counter to that? And I don't know that because I'm horrible at StarCraft and I don't play it anymore. But I feel like that's when we get to like something more like, I guess it's more organic meta at that point.
My goal is often to create a meta design where, with a limited amount of content and without the need for any expansions, people will continue to play and continue to pay for the game for years afterwards. So, like for instance, World of Warships is still making a lot of money. There hasn't been any significant expansion to the game other than some new ships. And 7 years later, it's still generating all that money from the original design that I spent 14 weeks on back in 2014.
StarCraft is a 20-year-old game.
That's efficient as far as Was it?
I was going to say that StarCraft is a 20-year-old game. You figure by now people would know every possible combination of strategy they can pick. So it's a major accomplishment if the meta is still changing in StarCraft.
If they were generating revenue from StarCraft and in substantial amounts today, that would be awesome. But since they aren't, it's just really and it's not even really a game that was designed with the meta. So it's just it's like saying how many people play Monopoly today. I used to play Monopoly every day after school with my friends, but if there was a meta, it was us talking over the board, taunting each other or whatever, while we were playing a game that itself didn't have a meta.
If you start looking into World Championship Monopoly, it gets really interesting. There are indeed some meta behind it, and it just like people will min max everything.
Well, Monopoly's interesting. It's one of those games that a lot of families and people around the world have house rules, and in that regard, that's kind of a meta. Like the free putting cash on the free parking space, not in the game rules whatsoever, but a lot of people play with it for some reason. It's it's an odd happenstance. I don't know where that comes from.
If you play vanilla Monopoly, it's a much better game than actually making those rules. It's people are like, oh, Monopoly is boring. Monopoly takes too long. No, it's a 30 to 40 minute game if you're not putting money on free parking or doing any of that weird stuff.
And selling every single property that's landed on. Yeah.
I would say that if you're able to min-max your Monopoly avatar between gameplay sessions, that's metagame. If you're just trying to min-max your performance in a game, I would not describe that as meta. I would describe that as strategy or tactics, whatever you prefer. Now, if you were to create house rules where you're changing the gameplay because of the house rules, then I would say that might be some sort of metagame created by the players, especially if they have to like flip to see which rules they're going to play. Then you're almost playing like a little game before the game to see what game you're going to be playing.
Let's see. Ooh, that's okay. There, my mic was acting a little up there. Yeah, I've never finished a Monopoly game myself with my family. We've never managed to get through all that. Pony says, I don't think I've ever started one.
Yeah, I think the official end to a Monopoly game is when the table gets flipped.
Flipped, yeah. Someone walks away because they got a bad deal or they got screwed.
I fear that this term word meta is going to become used is going to have so many different meanings down the road that it's going to become a useless word. And that's sad because I put a lot of work into that word. So, but it's just like, I'm creating new business models with new names to the new business models because like play to earn, which was my thing going back to 2000, is now so misused that I don't even want to use the term play to earn anymore because it has such a negative connotation. Same thing with free to play.
Yep, I mean, when we were coming up with this topic, like, there was a whole idea of the term metagame being used to describe, the persistence systems in, like, roguelike and roguelike design. And I had to eventually just say, you know what? We'll keep meta over there, I'll just keep calling this persistence and, avoid the headache. And maybe one day we'll tackle, what is a Metroidvania on one of these roundtables, and just drive everyone for a loop that way.
Well, are things like Metrovanias or platformers, are they designed with any sort of meta involved? Or is it all just, the best routes to take or...
I think metas in those realms can spawn from speedrunners. I think that when you have games with more of a customization aspect in them, like Mario Maker or Trackmania is one of those that just blows my mind because the meta is basically don't ever drive on the track as it's designed to be driven. It's bizarre. I don't even know if meta is the right term to use there, because it is. It's speedrunners are just trying to break your game. It's a tough one.
Do we consider speedrunning a part of a meta play these days, with people just super optimizing their runs for, insane strategies?
I would consider that a strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see your point about strategy and meta and it being conflated. Certainly in my head, because if it is strategy to, the traditional meta of looking at a card game and looking at how to get that edge and get that 56% win rate the deck with that is strategy at its heart.
Mm-hmm. I mean, otherwise you go take the opposite argument to the extreme. You can say, well, my brain was operating at that time, so that was happening in the metaverse, as opposed to in the game, because my brain isn't in the game.
Before in Discard, everything was math, language, and now everything is strategy. There is nothing else but strategy.
So, glitches, yeah, sequence breaks. And I guess for my final point, I think we can probably start wrap things up, because we're getting close to time anyway. But I guess my final point again is that I think for a game that you, as a developer, I think it is important to look at what people are doing, what are the popular trends, but you need to be very mindful of how much you fight against that. That if you purposely design, let's say everyone... Oh, I remember one other example from Payday 2. There was a period that the meta became all dodge focus. So the entire high-end strategy was just, everyone just wear your normal business suits and have, 80% dodge. And it completely invalidated all, armor and tank-based strategies. And I think that is something the wrong way of designing it. Like we've said earlier, you do not want to design or put something in the game that intentionally or even unintentionally invalidates another strategy. I think to what Seth was saying earlier, that you want to avoid nerfing. You want to buff everything so that it has viability. I've said this before, you want everything to have a moment in the spotlight. It shouldn't be the perfect solution 100% of the time, but there should be a situation where, option A, B, C, and D should be considered, overpowered for their specific situation. But again, that takes a lot of foresight, and it takes, I think, a really strong, philosophy for how you want to balance and build your game.
Well, even if you go back as far as, Magic the Gathering, there are crap rares. There are rares you'd never play, or even ultra rares or whatever some of the other games had. And certainly you don't want your commons to be too good. You want people to keep buying and purchasing, and in the gachas, that's certainly the thing. But in something that's an esport and a free-to-play game, that's where it gets weird. The power creep, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually a difficult balancing act that I don't know many companies that are pulled off. League does it sometimes, Riot does it sometimes. But, there's a lot of complaining when the meta changes. A lot.
I feel like that's where toxic community does play a big part. Not to say that they're all toxic, but you get a lot of complaints that have very high volume there.
Yeah.
Well, I think the win-loss binary in many cases creates a lot of toxicity in games, which is why moving away from the win-loss binary in our games.
Yeah, I 100% agree that is definitely a cause.
If you've never... I'm sorry. I was going to say, if you've never been to the Dead by Daylight forums, don't go to the Dead by Daylight forums, especially after a new patch.
I was trying to, we were talking about ELO systems based on performance in the roguelike chat. And I thought that I was trying to push that through as a concept, and no one was taking it.
Well, the idea of, if you're trying to, how do you make a game where everyone wins without it being boring? It's really something I've been struggling with for years. I create my current project is both cooperative and competitive with groups of up to 40 people on both sides when you have a tribe versus tribe battle. And how to how do I make that fair? How do I make that fun? And so my objective is to basically let both sides win based on their performance, but maybe there's different levels of winning instead of just you won or you lost. And that way, maybe if you did better than the team, even if you were a smaller team, then you get a bigger reward.
And I think like that goes kind of back to like one of the oldest challenges of like the MMO style of how do you make builds that aren't about direct damage interesting and exciting to play? How do you make the role of healer this fantastic thing? Like, do you want to be the healer or do you want to be that guy who jumps out in front and slashes and destroys everything? And we've seen developers try all kinds of ways of making, I don't know what will be the right term, like I guess like the busy work jobs or like the the management jobs more interesting or more worthwhile. And to what Ramin was just saying there, it reminds me a lot of, again, like going back to Dead by Daylight with their meta. That the problem they have with their matchmaking is that it is entirely built on win-loss, or how many, people you hook as a killer, how many times you escape. But the problem is that like good play in that game is helping your teammates. It's about crushing totems and stuff like that, and the game doesn't necessarily promote or really incentivizes that. Like you could be considered a horrible player in the matchmaking, but that could be because you help every teammate and you make sure every generator goes through or stuff like that. Like it feels like, again, like the focus on win-loss as the meta kind of is pigeonholing that design.
That sounds like that horribly violent game I see people playing in the background while they're doing their YouTube podcasts where they're picking people up and they're killing people and then picking them up and then dropping them on hooks. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
By Daylight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never played the game, obviously, but now I recognize it just from playing in the background when people are talking about things completely unrelated to that. There's some reason why they have to do that. Because it makes it more interesting, whatever they're talking about, to have that play in the background or something.
I guess
They focus
so.
on both things.
Yeah, there's a lot of YouTube channels that are just gameplay footage and you're talking about something completely unrelated over the gameplay.
Yeah.
I think I am about out of topics again. We can certainly segue into any other things, but I know we're coming up on time. So, does anyone else here have any final thoughts, final points they would like to make before we kind of do our round the table wrap up?
I would just like to say that if AAA would spend half of their designing resources into making their games better instead of trying to make them more expensive, we would have much better AAA games. Right now, almost all the designing horsepower is going into trying to find ways to get more money out of players and not into making the game any better than the last iteration of the game. So you get, X game 20, 21, whatever, because they haven't really improved the gameplay. They just figured out ways to make it more expensive every year. Most of the design innovation is occurring in the indie space where they still sell you the game instead of trying to fleece you out of money every month. Since they don't have since they make their money based on you actually wanting the game, they put all their work into designing a better game. So you see all the design innovations right now coming out of the indie space, and they're just being stolen by AAA. I just wish we lived in a world where all that money and all that expertise was being used to make better games instead of more expensive games.
All the shareholders. The job's not to make better games. The job's to appease the shareholders who want money.
Mm-hmm. And we're hearing all about like the whole big like Ubisoft thing that's going on right now. With what was it, Tencent is trying to buy out the company that their major investor in Ubisoft.
They're going to have a 54% controlling share.
Oh boy. Well, I'm sure that won't cause any major ripples or anything like that.
Trying really hard to stay out of politics.
We don't want to get Ramin in any more trouble.
At the moment, Tencent is not really clamping down on all the crazy stuff that they could be. The new Dune MMO, or I don't know if it's an MMO or just a multiplayer, is backed by Tencent. Funcom is 100% owned by Tencent. So I believe the same thing with the RTS. Now, granted, Chinese companies are under obligation to send all this data to the government. I don't know if that's going to apply if they only have non-controlling shares. I don't know if they're going to do it. I don't know. It's weird.
Quite eager to see how that turns out. But we may not know because it's not like there's transparency about data collection, even in American companies.
Yeah.
Oh, right. But I think with that, let us wrap things up for our talk. And this was a really fascinating one. And again, for people watching, if you have any topics you'd like to suggest for a future roundtable, let us know in the comments. But as customary for these roundtables, I'm going to give everyone a chance around the room to pitch or promote anything that they're doing, social media, etc. So I will go last this time. So we'll start with Rob, and once again, we'll work our way around.
I'm just getting back into social media a lot. So I have a Twitter account that I just made, 4th Gen Robot. YouTube channel, finally getting some editing done this last weekend. So some content coming there. And 4gr.games is the website that I'm also in the middle of building. So a lot to come.
All right, down to Seth.
I'm the strategy informer on the web and on Twitter. My links will be down below in beautiful card format. And I do the reviews, the previews. I pitch games. I tell people about great strategy games. And on the side, I do consulting work for various indie development companies. So if you're looking for help in pretty much anything except for art, I can certainly work for you or work with you.
All right, and Ramin?
I'm a co-founder of the gaming company Eravant, which we are a AAA MMO transmedia company that's making super social games where you can not only play with your friends but actually make new friends. And we're trying to bridge the gap between Web 3 and Web 2 by taking the best of Web 2 and the best of Web 3 without all the awful stuff from Web 2, like microtransactions, and the awful stuff like Web 3, which is, I don't even get me started. About half of our team is pulled directly from the original core team from Call of Duty. So we know how to make AAA games, and we'd like to be the first AAA Web 3 game.
All right,
the game is called Star Garden.
All right. And again, for me, if you're watching this, and I'm sure you at least know what this channel is, if you're new, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. There's the information over there on the overlay for my Twitter, Patreon, and Discord. Support is always greatly appreciated. And if you want to hang out and talk game design and topics, be sure to visit there. And again, check out all my books. There are links down below. If you're going to read the free-to-play book, buy at least 10 copies through the 10 pools. Just keep doing multiple 10 pools on that one. That will help me out really well. But for these roundtables, we are trying to do them at least once a month. We have many different topics and many different panelists set up. And as always, if you're a developer and you would like to come on for an interview or for me to cover your game, reach out, Twitter, Discord, whatever. But, gentlemen, that is going to do it. So, I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. This has been a lot of fun, and we'll, of course, chat on our Discord for our next one. But, as always, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, whereas they are on science of games. So, everyone, have a great rest of your night, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, gentlemen.